Dear beloved, welcome back. Today is St. Joan of Arc's feast day, and I'm super excited because we're going to get some advice from her about waiting seasons in life. So I'm really excited to jump in. But first, a little bit of gratitude. This week, I'm just really thankful for all of you, everyone who's tuned into the podcast so far and who is cheering me on social media and who has been with me from day 1, day 25, day 600 in my business. I'm just so very grateful for you all. And so today, like promised, we're talking about waiting seasons. And there's a lot of reasons why, someone might be in a waiting season. They're waiting for a job, they're waiting for graduation, they're waiting to meet their future spouse, whatever it may be. There's a lot of reasons for waiting seasons. And a lot of times there's a lot of advice out there that is like, just wait, right? Many women are told to wait, seemingly endlessly, right? Just kind of wait. It'll happen when it happens, all in the Lord's timing, things like that. And while I'm not going to say no, yes, of course, things happen in God's timing. I want to invite you to think of a different way of waiting. Instead of passive waiting, to think of active waiting. But quickly before I jump into that, I just want to have a disclaimer here. Sometimes there are seasons where we're explicitly told to wait. And in those seasons, yes, waiting and kind of passively waiting might be the right answer. And so I don't want to just blanket statement say that advice is totally bonkers and you shouldn't listen to it at all ever. But I do want to challenge you to think a little bit differently. And so I just want to have that disclaimer first here really quick that it's sometimes we may be told explicitly to wait by a spiritual director, by what we believe that the Lord is calling us to in that moment, whatever it may be. In those moments, it is, good and a good thing to wait. Yeah. Anyway, so jumping in, I want to invite you to reframe how you think about waiting. If you're not explicitly called to wait, then you're called to do, to live, to love, whatever it may be, as you were created by God. Okay? So imagine this, and you don't have to imagine too hard because it's reality, right? God created the world with an order, right? He knew what he wanted everything to do, right? He created the animals and the sky and the sea, and he made humans, right? And throughout all of history, right, we see these different waves of things happening, right? Some people royally messed it up, right? Some people royally screwed up with how they lived their lives, right? And then God sent his only son. And he sent him to show us exactly what he meant when he made us how to live, right? Christ is the perfect example. And then, Christ had to go back to the Father. And so, but God didn't leave us just hanging there, right? He sent us other examples to help us know what to do rightly in this life. So we have examples on both sides. We have examples of what not to do, and we have examples of what to do. And we have it written in our bodies and in our hearts and in our natures what to do. And so there's all of these things going for us. So in reality, we have no excuse not to know what to do. So if you're waiting because you don't know the next steps, figure it out because you can. A little tough love for you this morning because you can. You know what to do. You have examples. You have your nature. You have God himself telling you what to do in scripture, things like that. Like there are so many resources out there for you to know what to do. So if you're waiting because you don't know what to do, then I would take a really hard look at reality and just kind of look at that and think, why am I waiting? Because there are so many examples of what to do, right? And if we don't ever move forward, nothing will happen, right? And I know this to be true in a very personal sense, and I want to tell you a story. So a couple years back, and some of you who followed my journey may know this about me, but a couple of years back, I got really sick and I had to leave my grad school. I had to move home and I was in treatment, and it was like this long and weary time. And, a lot of that comes with just a lot, right? And I found myself in that time putting my life on hold, right? Seemingly, like no one could really blame me for that, right? I was really sick. I couldn't, like, I was telling myself things like, I can't pursue this dream until I feel better, or until I finish grad school, or until. And I had so many excuses. And that was a huge lie that I was telling myself, that I couldn't do XYZ until XYZ happened, right? That's a huge lie. And at one point, I stopped myself and had this realization that I was living in reality, right? It wasn't some bad dream that I would wake up from and everything would be back to good times, right? Everything would be great again, right? Or my life was automatically going to work out the way that I had always hoped and planned, right? It wasn't something that I could just snap out of. It was something that I was going to have to work through. And so once I realized that, I guess I stopped putting my life on hold. And it wasn't like, oh my gosh, I realized this, I'm so convicted, and bam, everything changed. It was a process. So slowly but surely, I stopped putting my life on hold and I started doing things, right? A really little thing that I did that made a huge difference was I stopped putting off, or I guess putting up with my living space the way it was, because I didn't love it. And I just stopped putting off, because it felt like I was home for a time, right? And this was temporary. And I couldn't wait until I got back into my life, right? And go back in school and whatnot. And so I didn't really have very much motivation to change it. But I decided, like, I'd rather love where I live instead of dreaming about why I'm not living the life that I should be living, right? So it's a little thing, like I said, but I changed the area, my living space, and that made the hugest difference, right? To like where you live, to like where you're spending your time. It was a game changer for me. And things like that started happening, right? And when you make these decisions, things snowball, right? And so I started taking other matters into my own hands. I started my business during that time because I felt this calling for a really long time. But the biggest lie holding me back was, well, I haven't finished grad school yet. But I started, and I took messy action, and I started before I was done with grad school, and I started before I was qualified, and I started before I was ready in a lot of senses. But I answered this call, and it's just incredible. And another thing is, when I had practice in making these decisions, I started having enough courage, and I realized that I couldn't finish grad school the way that I had started it. So I had to call other schools around, right, to figure out a way that I could finish. And so I had enough courage to step out and call these schools and make a plan, because I came to the realization that no one was going to do that for me. It wasn't going to fall into place. I needed to make it happen. And so I made it happen, and I was able to find a place that I could finish up studying here in the States. And it took me on this adventure, and it takes me where I live now. And it's incredible to see that I'm living a life that I couldn't possibly have imagined for myself during that time. But it's like, it's better than I could have imagined in a lot of ways, right? I'm almost a year post graduation from grad school. My business has been around for 2 years, 2 years of serving you guys and just answering the Lord's call, right? And I can't help but think, like, what if I hadn't started taking that action? What if I um, kept just sitting in that presumably waiting period, right? What if I had just sat there and didn't do anything, didn't take any action. And I'm scared to think of what that would look like because it's not a reality that I would want for myself, and I'm really glad that I did take action. So anyway, this story I think of when I have these moments of like, do I act or do I not, right? I think of this story and I think of other stories that many other people have told me, right? About how, they've heard all of this advice about waiting and then they didn't wait and they did something and now they're married, right? Or, whatever it may be, whatever waiting season you're in, right? And all of our lives would look so different if we had listened to some of that advice and just waited and let the Lord bring it to you, right? He will move mountains for you, but again, like I said at the very beginning, he created us with a plan. He created with us with a will and an intellect and the ability to do and act and to make decisions and to listen to his calling. And so to not do those things is not only not in accordance with his plan, but kind of like, oh, your plan? Oh no, that stinks. I'm going to wait until, something else happens. Anyway, I digress. And like I said about this episode, I want to talk about Saint Joan of Arc and her advice in this topic of waiting, because she was a saint who was known for the things that she did, right? Her doing, her courage, her bravery, her answering the Lord's call in a really beautifully bold way. And so she has a lot of things that she can tell us and teach us about these waiting seasons and about waiting actively, like this active waiting. And so the first quote I want to bring to your attention, right? The first quote that I want to share with you on these topics from her is, "If I am not, may God put me there. And if I am, may God so keep me." So in this quote, I love it because she's taking herself out of the driver's seat in a way, right? She's recognizing that trusting in God and following his will requires letting go of some self-control, or not self-control, letting go of some control. Of course, it always takes self-control, but of letting go of, knowing what's going to happen in every moment and things like that. She's humble, right? She's always asking the Lord, like making sure she's in the right spot. She's not overly, confident in that what she's doing is what is right. She's taking action based on what she believes is true and right for her to do. But then she's humbly coming to the Lord and double checking, right? If this is where you want me to be, keep me here. And if it's not, take me somewhere else, right? That's a beautiful aspect of this waiting season and just in life, right? She's humble, but she's moving, right? She's not stagnant. She's not holding or waiting. She's actively waiting. She's consistently pursuing God's will, like I mentioned. And for here, I think we can glean from her that the active waiting requires humility, right? It doesn't mean that, hey, I'm going to take action and all of a sudden everything falls on me and I then have all the say and whatever I decide to do will be blessed by God because I took action, right? That's a little bit of an extreme point of view, and that's a little bit of prideful, I will say, because showing up and doing the Lord's will or taking action doesn't mean that you're taking action in opposition to God's will. And a lot of times, right, it happens with his plan and then it's in harmony with it. I mean, that's the goal, right? We don't want to take action that's not in accordance with God's plan. And taking action doesn't mean that it's not in accordance with God's plan. And I think that's where a lot of the advice falls flat for waiting, is that it's almost implied that if you do act, that it's somehow not in the plan of God or in his will for you. which I think to be completely ludicrous and crazy. Um, so there's that. So the second quote that I want to share with you from Joan of Arc is, "One life is all we have, and we live it as we believe in living it. But to sacrifice what you are and to live without belief, that is a fate more terrible than dying." Wow. Okay, she was not holding back there. Um, a life not lived according to God's plan or your beliefs is far worse than dying. Can you imagine that? Can you just like for a minute like think what that would really look like? And unfortunately, I think a lot of people can identify with that and to think, oh, like really being called out by that. And like, yeah, and know that their experience shows them that yeah, it is far worse than dying. Um, this quote reminds me to remain really, really close to God, in all of my acting, right? To continue to hearken back to His will, to the values that I hold, and to my why, right? I've intentionally set up that the values that I am striving to live out in my life and to uphold in my life and my why behind the things that I do are in line with God's will. And so those can be tools that I can use and go back to, right? And so I want to constantly go back to those things, to constantly check against God's will, to make sure that I'm acting in accordance with that and acting in accordance to my why, and things like that. Because so easily, it's very often, I mean, it's easy to kind of get off track, right? And you start with good intentions, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I have to learn something about this. And you're hearing all of these voices that are telling you all of these different things. And their end goal might be different than your end goal, right? Their end goal might be success or fame or notoriety or whatever it may be, where that's not mine and that's not my end goal. And so following somebody's advice who is very worldly and in the world and of the world, and what success looks like in the world can be a little bit misleading, because we know that we want to stick with what God's plan is and not necessarily man's plan. And so that's it, it's just a good reminder to always harken back to the Lord's will and to the values that you have, come up with His help, and your why behind a lot of things. And I think that's why it's really important to have that why and to have that connection to the will of God in your life, to constantly go back to that. Um, yeah, because that way we get to protect the things that we do and know that it's going to be in line with the Lord's will, and we're not doing something that's going to get us off track, and kind of lose sight of where we're going. And the third quote here from Joan of Arc is probably my favorite quote of hers, which is crazy because she has some really great quotes. But it totally is what I'm talking about here in active waiting. So she says, act and God will act. I mean, how perfect is that, right? It's exactly what we're talking about. She's saying act, right? Step up to the plate. Um, answer the call. Take messy action. Do all of the things, right? Follow the Lord's plan. Do what you've been waiting on, right? Because when you do that, you will not be left alone. God will show up in a big way, right? He will be there to help you, to guide you, to, cheer you on, to do all of the things. He's going to show up. But just like if we wait, He's going to wait. And if we act, He will act. So it's that same kind of mentality of, if you want things to happen, you kind of have to act, and the Lord will show you in either a very dramatic way of like, oh my gosh, no, that's the wrong path, right? Or yes, that's the right path, because He honors us and He honors our decisions. So He's going to honor us if we say, no, I'm going to sit here and wait for you to do something. But He's going to be like, okay, I'm waiting too, right? Or He's going to honor you in acting by acting Himself, right? By coming alongside of you and never leaving you alone, right? He will show up, he will act. And in another way that, like, I know I'm not off track here, is that we are Christ's hands and feet on this earth, right? And if we aren't out there sharing his love and being examples of his mercy and his love and his truth to the world, not even like asking, well, who is, but instead, like, it's not happening. If not us, then how will somebody come to know the love of God, or to come to know the love of the Father, or come to know Christ himself? How will they? Because that's our mission as Catholics and as Christians, right? It is our mission. And if we're not acting in our mission, if we're not living our mission, then we're flailing in a lot of ways. And so this action is very important, because if we're not taking action and we're not loving and we're not sharing the gospel and sharing the truth and being good stewards of the gifts we've been given, then something is lacking, and others will not receive that love of God in the way that maybe they were meant to. And we can see that in our lives, right? If our friends are, not showing the love of Christ to us, we're going to be like, I don't deserve that, right? And so in a real way, that's how, we have to show up. We have to show up, and we have to say, not my will, but thy will be done. And sometimes that means, going out and loving your enemies, or going out and being Christ to somebody that you maybe don't feel like you want to in that moment, or you're tired, or you have a million other things on your plate. But always showing up and being that to others is our calling as Catholics and as Christians. And it's really important to do so. So anyway, I know I shared a lot of quotes from Joan of Arc, and I like to end these episodes with a quote to kind of chew on. And while you could chew on any of these quotes, because they're all amazing, and I hope you do, I do want to share a new quote from her with you guys. And it helps with like motivation of like what to do from here, right? And so she says, "Go forward bravely, fear nothing. Trust in God, all will be well." So take that as motivation for you going forward in your active waiting, right? In taking messy action, in doing the things that make you feel alive, in doing the things that we are called to do as Catholics and as Christians, and to help you, just on your journey with the Lord and in this life. So take that, and yeah, I'm happy to have had this time with you. Until next time.